Alright, hello, welcome! My name is Shaina, I'm an astrologer. So this video is going to technically be the last video in my Learn Astrology course 101 version. Okay, I'll be going to 201 after this. We're getting a little bit intermediate, but I consider retrogrades to kind of be the final part of the real beginner kind of fundamental things that you learn. And this is part 2, however, of my retrogrades video. So the first part, we talked about what a retrograde is, what a retrograde in the sky is, what does a retrograde mean in a birth chart, how do you find it, all that stuff. And I also talked about the personal planets being retrograde in a natal chart. So that's Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Now the sun and the moon do not go retrograde, but now we're going to talk about the social planets and the generational planets, aka more of the outer planets in astrology, and what it's like to have them retrograde in a natal chart. So this is Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Also, yes, I am filming this on the same day because, I don't know, my Capricorn brain said that I was getting the retrograde video done today, so I guess that's what I'm set on. And the outfit still barely matches the green I have on my eyes. Anyways, enough with the introduction, let's get some advertising out of the way. So I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. Thank you to everyone who's bought a reading, by the way, and if you've been to one of my lives on TikTok recently, an even bigger thank you. Well, not necessarily even bigger, an equally as large thank you. I am doing lives on my TikTok every Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific time. So if you want to hear me do some readings, do some live drags, do some synastry readings, just talk shit with me, shoot the shit with me. I literally love doing those. And yeah, check out my TikTok at shaina.emily. I've also been posting almost every day, very consistently, because you've heard me say that for a few times now, which means I'm being pretty consistent. And I also have a personal Instagram. All right, enough chit chat. Let's just dive into this video because I know this one's going to be a long one as well. So first thing I want to say is that it is pretty common to have an outer planet retrograde, at least one. You know, it's really common to have 2 retrograde. Now, to have them all retrograde, that is a little extreme. But to have 1 or 2 of these planets retrograde, don't think you're broken. Don't think something's wrong with you. It's actually fairly common. Now, it still affects you strongly just the same, but it's more likely that you have one of these planets retrograde than you don't. I actually don't have any of these outer planets retrograde, which is probably why I think I externalize a lot of my personality a lot more than most people do. So we are going to start with the planets closest to the Earth in orbit and go out. So that means that we are starting with Jupiter retrograde. I should also mention, if you don't know about the planets and the general energies of these planets, you really need to know that first to understand them retrograde. So I will link the outer planets video in astrology that I already made up here in the cards, which is also part of my Learn Astrology series. These videos are obviously very interconnected, so it's really good to kind of watch them in order. Jupiter retrograde. Jupiter goes into retrograde approximately every 14 months. So it's roughly around every year, about once a year. And it stays retrograde for 120 days, which is approximately 4 months. So for 4 months out of most years, Jupiter is retrograde. With Jupiter retrograde, it turns luck inward. It makes luck internal. So it can kind of feel like, wow, I get to see all these other people experience all this external good luck, get all these external gifts in life, have this external course set up for them that just gives them gold at the end of the rainbow. And I feel like I don't ever get that. I feel like as the Jupiter retrograde person, I have to make my own luck, that my luck and my good fortune only comes from me and all comes from within. So of course this makes a much more self-reliant, self-determined person, but it can make also a little bit of an embittered person, of course, because eventually you're going to get jealous of what it seems like all the good fortune that everybody else just naturally was born with or receives. It can very much be that feeling of, everybody around me was born with the trust fund and I wasn't. I had to make my own money. Now I had great luck in creating a business and making my own money, but still I had to go about it myself and it felt like nobody really held my hand. Now with Jupiter retrograde, you can have a very strong amount of inner guidance because with Jupiter direct in the natal chart, it feels like sometimes there's this little spiritual guardian or lucky person or, whatever you want to call it, kind of like guiding you along your way and helping you out and giving you like external signs that where you're going is the right way. But with Jupiter retrograde, you don't have that. You only have this strong sense of inner guidance. I feel as though I should do this, and I know that I shouldn't listen to the advice that other people tell me because my luck does not come to them as theirs does if their Jupiter's direct. Also, this tends to be a position where you have very different viewpoints from everybody else around you or everyone that you grew up with. Jupiter has a lot to do with beliefs, spiritual, philosophical, sometimes even religious, although that does have more to do with Neptune, but that still can be relevant, especially political beliefs. You may feel like you're a Republican in a group of Democrats or a Democrat in a group of Republicans, or what I would even say is more common with this placement is somebody unaffiliated in a group of people that are strongly politically affiliated, or, you know, a person that aligns with the Green Party in a group of Republican and Democrats. You know, that I think is a much stronger Jupiter retrograde example, because you really feel like you view things so foreign to everybody else, so extremely different. And the way that you philosophize and go about things is just always seems to be misinterpreted. It can feel like anytime you share your views or spread your views or speak about them, everybody doesn't understand them and doesn't understand where you're coming from, and you might get shunned or get these weird responses that you don't feel like you deserve. I'm just using this as an example because it's so easy. If you've written a group of people that all vote Democrat or Republican, if you were to say, oh, I'm voting Green Party, they would look at you like you're crazy and they would tell you that your vote is lost. But you might have a reason as to why you do that and try to explain it to them, but it'll just, again, they won't get it. They'll misinterpret it, and it can be very frustrating. So it can cause you to really just keep your views to yourself. It can also feel like your individuality or your jovialness, you know, the jovial side of your personality was kind of shut down from a young age. Like you weren't allowed to be externally excitable or externally like loud and proud and like very, you know, Jupiterian, very big and take up space, all that kind of stuff. You might have felt like you weren't really allowed to do that. You might have felt more like you had to just kind of fit in, like you just really couldn't cause a scene. You could have even grown up in like a very stark and cold environment. This might be a person that's more pessimistic rather than optimistic, always kind of preparing for the worst, expecting doomsday, expecting the worst, and you can really struggle with your optimism and looking on the bright side of life. Maybe you feel like internally you are very optimistic. You just have to expect the world to not support that optimism, if that makes sense. This might not be somebody that's always complaining. I mean, it can be, but it might not be somebody that's always complaining and always going, woe is me. Be saying externally like, oh, I'm sure it'll work out, but internally, you know, I wonder if they actually do think that, you know. This is somebody that has trouble taking bold risks, bold moves, making new paths in life. You know, they feel like they kind of have to take the already traveled path, which is why it can be a little bit more, you know, that Saturnian vibe. Take what's safe, do what's safe. I can't really take any big, bold risks here. They might even be scared to like try new food or travel or go someplace new. All those kinds of things can be really nerve-wracking for a Jupiter retrograde. You also, because this is a social planet and it changes about once a year, you might feel like you're a little bit at a different level than the people in your grade. Rather, you know, maybe you feel like you're a little bit behind them. Maybe you feel like you're a little bit in front of them. Maybe you feel like in some places you're behind them, in some places you're in front of them. You may struggle with conventional education. You probably are much better teaching yourself. You probably don't have the best relationship with teachers. Maybe you don't like teachers that much, or maybe you've even come across a lot of teachers that are scammers or that you don't trust. And so I think that these people have a very strong inner teacher that will teach them better than any other external person can. So they can really gather a lot of knowledge, but they gather it best independently rather than with a group of people. Spiritual, philosophical, and religious views can go through periods of losses of faith, you know, feeling like there's no point in believing that everything will be okay, while other times they can be overly optimistic and believe and truly just say everything will be fine, I don't have to worry about it, but they struggle to kind of strike a realistic sense of balance with it. These are people that really want to live by their own laws, their own morals, and their own code of ethics. They struggle to follow the ones that everybody else seems to follow. They need more, which I kind of like about them, they need more of a reasoning as to why they're following what they're following. They can't just blindly follow it if it doesn't align with them. They really live their life in their own way, with their own morals. These people can be very restricted by the life that they have, or by the life that they led, or by the life that feels ahead of them. They feel stuck to a certain path and like they aren't able to change it or choose another one. Or maybe they struggle to even find and choose a path. And that can also, in a weird way, make you feel restricted as well. This is a person that can have trouble seeing another person's perspective. They can feel like their perspective is absolute and true because it is true and absolute for them. And they can have trouble kind of listening to anybody else. These might have been cautious children who weren't as daring as others others, again, there can be a fear of risk taking and taking big moves. So this might be the kid that when you say jump, I'll catch you, they probably wouldn't trust you, you know, whereas the other kid would just jump and I'll figure it out, you know? The younger kid will be like, well, why would I figure it out? I would need to know that there's for sure a mattress that would catch me if you don't. These people can feel like they're left out for themselves in the world, like they're not supported by a higher being or a higher deity. Or even maybe you were forced to convert to a religion that you didn't feel comfortable with later on in life, and you kind of had to keep that feeling of displacement to yourself as well. Like you're the only person that doesn't fully understand this religion because you weren't actually brought up in it. Also, you might have seen that people do not practice what they preach, especially within a philosophical or religious standpoint. Like they said you have to do one thing to be a good person, but then they wouldn't do it, but they would still expect you to do it as well. And you kind of saw a lot of inconsistencies in that nature. These people really have a higher inner abundance and prosperity than most people. They can truly create something out of absolutely nothing, create their own luck from thin air, but they have to work at it and do it for themselves a little bit more than a lot more than most people. Saturn retrograde. I find this one to be extraordinarily common, honestly. Basically, Saturn goes retrograde about once a year. It stays retrograde for approximately 5 months out of the year. So nearly half of people have Saturn retrograde in their birth chart. These people felt like responsibility was not taught to them, right? They felt like they might have not had role models around them, or they felt like, you know, growing up and growing older was not something that they were outwardly assisted in. It would make sense if this was a person that wasn't taught how to drive by somebody, but rather had to take the initiative themselves and somehow teach themselves how to drive, somehow teach themselves how to do taxes, somehow teach themselves all these adult things. These wind up being very self-responsible people, and they feel as though they cannot rely, but maybe because they can't, rely on anybody else to teach them things and to help them grow up and to teach them responsibility. Now, depending on your Saturn placement and other things, was whether or not you took that and ran with it. You know, there are some people that are Saturn retrograde that are like, I am more responsible than most people because I had to be responsible for myself, you know, younger than most anybody else did. But then there are also some Saturn retrograde people that are very irresponsible because maybe their family took care of everything for them, and that's why they didn't have to learn a sense of responsibility. So it can go one of two extreme ways. It just depends on the rest of the Saturn energy that you have, or lack thereof Saturn energy that you have. Usually Saturn retrograde shows some kind of lack of parental rules and parental guidelines. Like maybe your parents were very loose with their rules, didn't give you strict rules, or maybe they did give you rules but they didn't follow through on them. It would make sense that if this was a person where they said that this was a rule and then when you didn't obey it, nothing happened, but yet something that they didn't say was a rule, you didn't obey because you didn't know to, and then you got a punishment for it, right? It's like there's kind of no rhyme or reason to authority. It can be very nonsensical, and it can make you build a big distrust and mistrust in authority. It creates a strong inner authority, but you probably have trouble externalizing your authority. So this is probably somebody that does not want to be a boss, somebody that has no interest in telling people what to do, somebody that really doesn't feel the need to rise through the ranks. They just kind of want to do their own thing and go their own path as far as responsibility and their job goes most of the time. You really don't like it either when somebody tries to be an authority over you or try to put strict rules onto you. So a lot of people say that Saturn retrograde plays out more like a strong Uranus, and I do see what they're saying in the sense that, you know, somebody with Saturn retrograde does not like being told what to do, does not like having an authority over them, has trouble obeying rules, has trouble, obeying external restrictions because you were never given external restrictions. You only give yourself internal restrictions that you decide upon. Nobody sets them for you. So when people do, you can naturally be very rebellious in it because, and that's how it kind of acts a little bit like Uranus. There can be a lot of external disorganization, but a lot of internal organization. Like your room is a mess, but you know where everything is. Your room is a mess, but you're always on time to work and you're very diligent. Your room is a mess and you don't keep a calendar, but yet you're always where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. Or even like your thoughts are very organized. Maybe you have a very organized mind, a very organized internal clock. Your room may be messy, but you always wake up at 8 a.m. every day. for example. There is definitely a strong rebellious nature, whether that's purposefully or accidentally, just because your parents' rules really made no sense. Now, a big thing to kind of watch out for with this is that there can be major struggles with boundaries and limitations because you do not know probably how to set external boundaries with people, right? Because Saturn is all about your boundaries and you know where your line is. With Saturn retrograde, you don't know how to externalize and share those boundaries. This could be a person that their boundaries get walked over and stepped on a lot. You also might struggle with setting a limitation on how much you can drink, how much you can smoke, how much you can indulge in something, right? This is also an energy like Mars retrograde that can be very lethargic, can have some laziness to them if they do not have that strong internal self-discipline that it can sometimes create. If they don't have that, it can create a lot of lackadaisical qualities. There can also be a strong inner melancholia, you know, just because it is Saturn retrograde. So that depression can be turned inward. There can somewhat be a nonsensical melancholia. It makes sense if, you know, Saturn retrograde can lead to depression. I'm not saying that if you have Saturn retrograde, you are depressed, but I'm just saying it would make sense that if you have depression and you have Saturn retrograde, that is one of the reasons why you have depression, especially if it's in like the 8th house or the 12th house or even the 2nd house or, you know, whatever it might be. That can really indicate depression. People really misinterpret the rules, the guidelines, and the boundaries that you lay out for them. You may feel that you're setting obvious guidelines and boundaries, but people don't get it and they misinterpret it and they step on them and they use it and all that kind of stuff. And it can be very frustrating because you might find that other people respect their boundaries because they're Saturn direct, but people do not have the same respect for yours. It can feel like with this energy that dealing with everyday things is a big burden that you do not like doing. You can really avoid your responsibilities. You can really just like not check the mail because you don't want to know about your bills. You can really just kind of avoid any kind of impending realistic doom that is coming because your Saturn is retrograde. Discipline can be really hard. Working steadily towards something can be something you struggle with because you can lose focus, you can lose motivation, and you can lose determination. You can constantly be, you know, maybe trying to set goals internally, but you have trouble externalizing those goals and actually getting them done. It kind of gives me a feeling of somebody that has all these ideas for their New Year's resolution, but then when New Year's comes and the first day they just kind of lay around and kind of do the same old, and then feel discouraged and then lay around even more because they feel even more discouraged. This can even sometimes cause fleeting relationships. Just because, again, there's that struggle to commit externally. There's a struggle for long-term decision-making in all aspects of the word. So there can be commitment issues with Saturn retrograde. This can be with a job, this can be with a person, this can be with a house, this could be with really anything. There can be a fear. Because also with long-term decisions and commitment comes authority and comes rules and guidelines that you really don't want to deal with. You see how this is kind of Uranian in a way? These can also be late bloomers, not when it comes like Mars, like sexually, you know, not like that, but rather intellectual and emotional maturity. You can be a late bloomer when it comes to that, if you honestly ever bloom at all when it comes to that. You really are here to kind of break inherited obligations. Your parents might feel an internal obligation to X, Y, or Z that's kind of pointless, and you are here to examine that, question it, and break it and set your own set of obligations. Just be careful that you don't do rebellion for the sake of rebellion. A lot of times your rebellion gets misinterpreted and people don't really understand why or what you're rebelling against, and it can sometimes things can get lost in the sauce. Your karma also does not show itself externally like many other people when, you know, the IRS comes and rains down on them, but rather it's shown internally. You get these internal limitations or these internal blocks that is karma speaking to you and trying to get you to learn your lesson. Also, there tends to be you know, dealing with problems alone and in isolation rather than sharing what your issues are, you know, rather than calling somebody up on the phone and venting. You can tend to just kind of keep all your problems in and let it fester, and that can lead to health issues. That can especially lead to health issues because, you know, going to the doctor is an obligation and it's an authority and you don't want to have to make the appointment, so then those health issues can just kind of fester and can create something worse than they were meant to create, especially because your lessons come internally externally. So just be cautious that if you're having any health issues, especially if it's in the 6th or the 12th house, that these are not lessons to teach you to be more responsible and more disciplined with yourself. Fear, self-doubt, and guilt can really live vibrantly inside of you. You do have an imposter syndrome, but that can turn you into being your own master. You can be more self-disciplined, self-reliant, and independent than people with Saturn direct. And people with Saturn direct can really look at you and aspire to be as inwardly disciplined as you are. Next up, Uranus retrograde. So Uranus retrograde is very similar to Saturn retrograde in that it goes retrograde once a year and it stays retrograde for approximately 5 months. So again, almost half of people have Uranus retrograde in their birth chart. So it is very common, and I do see this one show up more than most, along with Saturn and Neptune. So Uranus retrograde, people tend to say that this shows up more like your Uranus is acting like a Saturn, or like Saturn energy, and I do see why that is said. So basically with Uranus retrograde, Uranus is that weird, wacky side of you, that your weird, wacky self, your freak flag, all that kind of stuff. And that is turned internally, okay? So you do not feel like you can show and express your weirdness externally. You feel like you have to keep it in. I do find that this is one that is very common in people that are gay and grew up gay, specifically that were not allowed to be gay externally. I'm not saying that Uranus retrograde means you're going to be gay. I'm just saying it would make sense. You know, the themes of this, oh my God, I feel so weird for being gay. I can't share it. I have to stay in the closet. I have to hide this part of me, suppress this true part of me, and because of my conservative environment I'm growing up around, right? Makes sense, you know? It doesn't equal being attracted to the same sex, but rather some of the experiences that come with being gay and needing to be in the closet. No, it can just come in general, like I feel like I'm so weird and I feel like I'm so different to everyone and I feel like I'm not allowed to express that. I grew up in a very cut and dried family. They had a very specific path and way for me, even like a military family or something like that with a lot of rules, maybe even very religious Christian Catholic family, and I am weird. I'm not like that. I'm not typical, but I cannot express it. I don't know how people just outwardly rebel and say, you know, fuck you parents, I'm not doing what you tell me. You do not feel comfortable doing that. You do not feel like you're allowed to do that. You feel like you have to keep it all in. You really just feel like you have to hide yourself. Like I keep on mentioning, retrograde energies struggle to strike a balance. So you can, and I've seen this play out, you can go through periods of being extremely conservative and periods of being extremely liberal, and you kind of have trouble striking a balance. It can be extraordinarily radical, almost like Saturnian in how radical it is. I am correct. I am right. I will not listen to you about what you have to say. I will not hear you out. You know, I will not change. Nobody or nothing can change me externally to be different in how I express my views internally. Only I can change how I feel about things and my views. I will not be at all influenced or peer pressured by you with them. You know, again, very Saturn. Uranus retrograde feels really weird, like the wrong kind of weird, okay? And because they feel so wrong weird, they struggle to externalize their weirdness, and they can come across almost more conservative and less weird than almost anybody else, more conforming than most people. But in reality, that's just because they are really diluting and hiding their weirdness, hiding their strangeness. They're so handsome. They also feel like when they do try to let their freak flag fly and kind of externalize their weirdness, it gets misinterpreted, it gets mistaken, it's not understood correctly. And so then they feel like they just kind of have to shell up and hide it because there's no point. Because people don't get it. They're only going to be ostracized even more than they already feel. These people really struggle with just authentically being them. They can really come across very closed-minded and standoffish and very unaccepting of people's views and opinions because their views and their opinions only come from themselves and come internally rather than most people's views, which come from observations and externally and, you know, hearing out what people have to say and then kind of making something from there. Uranus retrograde people's views only come from what's inside their own experience and inside their own head. Again, because Uranus is expressed in a more Saturnian way, they can tend to have a much more structured and conventional way of life. They can be a little bit scared to try new things and break out of the box. There can be a lot of internal anxiety, of course, because Uranus is all over the place, here, there, and everywhere. So of course their inside is like hyperactive and they have no place to put it. Also, I think that these people can frequently ignore or miss external wake-up calls or calls for change. You know, Uranus direct is like, wow, what I just experienced out in the world, that was a real wake-up call for me to like change my views and change the way I see things. With Uranus retrograde, they either miss those things or they just don't feel like they ever get them at all. Like all their wake-up calls are internal. I do believe that these people's mind works much faster than most, downloading just wild amounts of information, taking in vast amounts of knowledge and sorting it and accessing it almost like they have like a computer robotic-like mind. They can have crazy strokes of genius, high senses of creativity, and they can be extremely internally creative. You know, you don't need to search for your tribe, just be comfortable being a tribe of one and going your own way. As long as you're being authentically you, that at the end of the day is all that should really matter. Because I do sometimes see these people aligning themselves with people that they don't agree with out of a desperation to fit in. And there's really no need to do that. These people go through so many internal changes, it just might not seem like it because they struggle to externalize it. So trying to take some risks and put yourself out there a little bit more might lead to a little bit more of contentment with who you are and how you display yourself. Neptune retrograde. Neptune goes retrograde in a very similar way to Uranus and Saturn. It goes retrograde once a year and it stays retrograde approximately every 5 to 6 months. Again, this is an extremely common retrograde to have. Half of the year has it and half of the year doesn't. So Neptune retrograde can have a major suppression of your spiritual side. This can be a person that only wants to project logic and stick with science, stick with the facts, and has trouble being guided by their intuition and being guided by outward signs that appear and show up in the world. They also might struggle with creativity. Now, these people are highly creative. It is just all internalized. It is all turned inward. They are highly creative inside their mind, and there's quite a dream world that lives inside their head. These people are notorious for spacing out and daydreaming and just being in their own world, but they have trouble externalizing those daydreams, externalizing that world. And what I mean by that is somebody with Neptune direct might go, oh, I dream of buying a house one day. And so they will work really hard to externalize that dream of buying a house. Whereas Neptune retrograde might just go on Pinterest all the time, have a dream house, dream of all these houses, but never actually take any action to make those dreams a reality. Also, I see with this placement, I have so many creative ideas, a world of creativity inside my head, but I struggle to get that creativity externalized. You know, I have this great idea for a project, but whenever I try to do it externally, it doesn't come out how I want it, I get discouraged and I give up on it. This could also be somebody that's the artist, that they feel like their art is always getting misinterpreted, like their idea and their message is one thing, but when everybody takes a look at their art and interprets it, they completely interpret something different, and it can frustrate them and make them not want to externalize their creativity. They can really have trouble being in the present moment and can live in their head and their mind all the time. They can even create strong fantasies that they believe more than reality and life itself. There can be a really fine line with this Neptune retrograde on what is real and what is fake. Like they believe their fake made up world more than their real world. This is also very common to have psychic dreams, dreams that are very predictive, all that kind of stuff. These people might not like outwardly creative types, outwardly artistic types. I'm thinking of a Neptune retrograde person that I knew that hated that everybody in Gen Z generation, because they're part of Gen Z too, you know, liked angel numbers and was into astrology and was into all these like Neptunian things. They were like, oh, I don't believe in that. That's so goofy. But at the same vein, they were a very creative and artistic person and they lived very much in their own dreamland. But yet they completely shunned at all of these, you know, external signs that shows that we're living in a dreamland and that we're living in a fantasy, you know? They can really just also miss signs. I keep seeing these angel numbers or my intuition, or, you know, the world keeps on trying to guide me down a path. The world keeps on trying to tell me this, and they just really might not listen because they want all of their intuition and their guidance to come from themselves. But they can also feel very internally lost. So it's like, how can internal guidance come from yourself when you feel so lost and feel guidelessness? If that's a word. This can also be somebody that grows up in a very religious or spiritual household but does not align themselves with that religion or that spirituality. Or they grow up in a household that really didn't have any spirituality, really didn't have any religion. And so when they go out in the world and people are religious and are spiritual, they just don't understand it and they don't get it. Maybe even they have their own religion or their own sense of spirituality, but they struggle to externalize it and share it for fear of judgment, or because they feel like whenever they do, it's always misinterpreted and people misunderstand it and they don't get where they're coming from, so they'd rather just keep it to themselves. They really can have a very blurry mind. Very baseline explanation, but it can really feel like that. Okay, this is just my theory, but because Neptune is all about, you know, enmeshment with other people, external enmeshment, you know, also unconditional love, these people might struggle with only expressing conditional love, only feeling like they received conditional love growing up. They also might struggle to feel enmeshed and bonded with their family members or their relationships. They might feel very separate to people, you know, because Neptune kind of rules that merging of two souls. They may feel like they never really merge with somebody else and that they just kind of remain singular, you know, for lack of a better word. I think that because Neptune direct really has troubles with boundaries, I wonder if Neptune retrograde has troubles putting up too many boundaries and not letting anybody in and not letting anybody into their world. That's just my thought. You can let me know if that resonates with you down below. Okay, this is all my speculation. I'm gonna be real. I've literally never read anything that says this, but I feel like these people would not feel a part of the collective, would not feel a part of the collective unconscious, would not feel the ebbs and flows and shifts. So it would make sense if these people are more hesitant towards astrology, because it would make sense if they weren't as connected to it, right? Like I have Neptune direct, I feel very connected, and Cancer rising, I feel very connected to the ebbs and flows of things. It would make sense to me if somebody with Neptune retrograde and like a staunch rising would feel very disconnected from the planetary movements, but rather feel inwardly connected to their internal movements and their internal shifts and have struggles connecting to what everybody else is experiencing and what everybody else is feeling. I do think that these people go through extremes with sleep. Like I could see these people sleeping all the time, like really using their escapism through sleep, and, you know, going through periods of just like having no problem sleeping or periods of insomnia, but having struggles to strike a balance. I think that they could also deny other people's realities and really could be prone sometimes to gaslighting people because they only see things from their reality and their perspective. They struggle to tap into the collective unconscious perspective. And so I think this can lead to some accidental gaslighting because I think that they only see things through their own weird, wacky lens. I think they might also struggle with some empathy, like they give a lot of empathy to themselves, but they struggle to give empathy to others. I mean, or empathy was not given to them at all. So they don't give any empathy to themselves whatsoever. And maybe they give too much empathy to other people. Whatever it is, struggles with empathy. Some kind of cutoff, some kind of lack of empathy somewhere in their life. There can be major loss of faith, loss of doubts, loss of faith in humanity, loss of faith in their religion, loss of faith in other people's religion or beliefs. Now, I think that these people can have an amazing source of inner healing and a source of just healing in general that lives inside them, right? Neptune direct kind of taps into the outer source of healing that's kind of floating in the nebosphere. I'm totally making up these words. Oh, but you get what I'm saying, hopefully. Maybe not because you're Neptune retrograde. Maybe you only get your foofy words, you know? No, I'm just kidding. But they have an amazing source for inner healing. I think these people can be real, true healers if they can accept the fact that Neptune exists outside of them, you know? And lastly, Pluto retrograde in a natal chart. Pluto goes into retrograde about once a year, and it stays in retrograde for, again, about 5 to 6 months. Very similar to the planets that I've previously mentioned. So about half of people have Pluto retrograde, and about half of people have Pluto direct. So this is another one that I think is pretty hard. You have so much trouble externalizing your autonomy, externalizing your power, externalizing your sense that you have control over your life, and you also are able to have control over others. Now, what I mean by that, it doesn't sound good to have control over others' lives, but more of what I'm saying is if somebody were to say, hey, don't do that because I don't like that, you're disrespecting me. That is kind of like feeling like you have control over somebody else's life to affect yours, to say, no, I don't want that to happen, that's disrespectful, right? A Pluto retrograde might not be able to speak up and say, hey, you're disrespecting me. Hey, that's not what I want to happen with me. Like, okay, you can do that for you, but that's not me. Hey, you boss, authority figure, you're disrespecting me, you can't do that, I won't have that. Like, I could totally see Pluto retrograde staying in a job that's really unfair, or staying in a relationship that's really, the power imbalance is very strong for a very long time. Now, these people have a very strong sense of inner power and inner autonomy over themselves, but they struggle to externalize it. So on the outside, it appears as though people are walking all over them. But at the same time, they are being also very, very strict with themselves and almost like what they allow into their life. These people can go through extremes, expressing an extreme amount of power towards people because they're going the opposite way and exploding, and they're tired of feeling like everybody walks all over them, so that they overly express their power, or feeling like they can't say anything and they, everybody thinks they're so mean and cruel and that they're so rude and that they don't express it at all. It goes through big phases. It also feels like whenever they try to externalize their power, externalize their authority, that it gets misinterpreted. People don't understand why they're making the rules they're making, why they're expressing their power over you. People don't get it, and it's very much misunderstood. You might have growing up had authority that abused their power, and so you almost like don't believe in it. You don't respect people to have power over you because you don't trust people to do so. Sometimes this can be somebody with a slightly weaker personality that needs others to stand up for them, or expects others to stand up for them when that's not their job. They can have really strong inner beliefs and really strong convictions that cause people to see them as threatening or even really rebellious. So much so that they feel so weird about it and so uncomfortable about it that a lot of times they wind up keeping it to themselves, because if they express it, they feel isolated because of it. They can also really struggle to face trauma and face things head on. Staring trauma dead in the face and owning up to it and being honest about it can be really scary. They can have a tendency to avoid it and run away from it, or even get mad at it and ignore it. They can also tend to accidentally invalidate other people's trauma, invalidate other people's authority, invalidate other people's hard experiences, because they do have a very strong inner validation of their own. And when they do go through trauma, they do go through it alone. They do not like to experience it with other people. They do not like to mourn with other people. They do not like to share their hard problems that they've been through with other people. So they then therefore see you expressing it and your trauma externally as a weakness that should be kept internalized, and you should deal with it yourself. So these people can come across very rude and cold and unforgiving, when in reality, they're so affected by something, they don't know how to deal with it, and so they shun it away. These people can really lash out because they've internalized their trauma for so long. Instead of reaching out and becoming vulnerable with people through their trauma, they internalize it and disengage and almost rebel against it. These people really struggle with being vulnerable and with being open with other people. They feel so vulnerable inside. They feel like the cushiest little softest person inside, and they dwell on their traumas. They dwell on these things so much, but they never are able to talk about it. These people would really not like therapy, right? Even though people with Pluto retrograde are the ones that need it more than others because they internalize everything too much. You regenerate internally instead of externally. People go through external like rising from the phoenix and the ashes, all that kind of stuff, but you rather regenerate internally and change your makeup and the way you go about things from an internal perspective. They tend to be over controlling over their own life because they internalize their own power and almost give themselves too much power in their own life, if that makes sense, to the sense that they hold on to everything so tightly that they do or don't do right or wrong or whatever it may be, that they tend to miss out on things due to fear. These people can be very scared, very fearful, very mistrustful, that sometimes they can really stay home and kind of shell up. These people really need to go through periods of detoxing their emotions because this buildup can really lead to ill health. And with Pluto retrograde, you might not share your ill health with other people, but rather keep it a secret for too long. I also think that you might have grown up where control was unfair. Like, let's say this is a sibling situation. Let's say when sibling has Pluto retrograde, it's almost like their parents exerted unfair amounts of control onto one sibling, but not the other. So that person with Pluto retrograde does not see control as fair and equal. Everybody has an equal amount of control, but rather some people are given more control in life and need to be more controlled than others. They can easily be manipulated, but also simultaneously not understand when and how they're manipulating others. And they can really also not understand that they're being manipulated either. There can be a real misunderstanding as far as manipulation goes, because retrograde planets have everything to do with misunderstanding, because we're kind of misunderstanding the fact that in the sky that the planet is not moving backwards. We think it is moving backwards, but it's actually moving forwards. We're just misunderstanding it. So it makes sense that you misunderstand how manipulation is used, how you're using it, and how people are using it towards you. I think that these people go about getting and gaining power in a very different and backwards way than most people. Most people show strength, and that's how they gain power. I actually think people with Pluto retrograde show weakness and gain power through showing weakness and victimizing themselves. These people cannot deal with anybody else dictating their life, but simultaneously they struggle to stand up to anybody that does. These people can really connect to their inner ancestors and their inner knowledge. They might struggle to connect externally to ancestors or believe in some sort of external guidance, or even they might even not believe in, ancestral trauma, ancestral cycles. They may think that everything that they go through and that they cycle through comes from themselves, and they might feel that way as well, that they are responsible for all their cycles, they are responsible for all their trauma alone. These people can get an extreme hyper focus on one particular hobby or one particular study and kind of ignore everything else in the world. And they can have very skilled powers of observation if they listen to them. I guess my advice to Pluto retrograde is just to get more comfortable in standing up for yourself when it is the time to do so, instead of waiting and letting it build up and build up resentment and then popping off and standing up to power in a very inappropriate way and a very inappropriate time. Doing it when it's being itched in you, and acknowledging it when it's happening rather than letting it fester. All right. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you enjoyed this series. This will be the end of Astrology 101. We'll be moving into 201 very soon. So I hope that you enjoy this little 101 course. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. I have a TikTok at shaina.emily, and I have a personal Instagram. You can check all those out with the links down below. Here's the link to the rest of the course if I haven't put it up yet. And thank you so much for watching again. Bye!